I am Debbie Givens, and I am the current chair of the Research Intensive Programs in Physical Therapy Consortium, which is a consortium of ACAPT. And we also have Mary Shaw, who is the vice chair. And so she very shortly, in 1 month, she will be the chair, which I'm very happy to pass the baton after 3 years. One of the things I want to point out before I serve as moderator tonight is I'm going to share my screen here and tell you about, am I showing the right screen, Mary? And
yes.
Okay, that we hope you're coming to the Education Leadership Conference in Atlanta. And if you do, we have some good things for you to also participate in. The Research Intensive Program, the RIPPT Consortium welcomes you. We have what we call our, regular members who are programs that have PhD and high research intensive activities and in research intensive type programs, but we also have associated members. And so they are aspirational programs. Sujay is our on our leadership advisory board, and he represents those types of programs. So everybody is welcome to our business meeting, and that will be on Saturday from 8:15 to 10. And then we have started offering separate programming. We've usually done that traditionally, and then this meeting has gotten so big, so we are doing this on Sunday. And we tried to broaden the interest to attract, again, all people who might be interested in the topics just like tonight. And so how a research infrastructure benefits the education of DPT students and the development of faculty. And again, I'll be moderating this and one of the speakers, as well as David Brown at UTMB, Jules DeWald at Northeastern, and Darcy Reisman at Delaware. So that is just our little plug for what we're doing at ELC. So we hope that you consider coming to those activities. And so, so that I don't take any more time of these gentlemen tonight, I'm very pleased to moderate this session on how to build research capacity. I have come to know both of these gentlemen very well over the years. We have Sujay Galen, who this is his second time to present for RIPPT, and he has a lot to share. He is the chair of the Department of Physical Therapy at Georgia State University. And for his first time up for us is Dr. Terry Grindstaff, and he is an associate professor in the physical therapy department at Creighton University. And I, at one point, served as his department chair at Creighton. And so I'm very pleased that both of these gentlemen were willing to come and share how they are so creative in driving their research agendas at their different institutions. So I'll let them take it away.
Excellent. Well, I'll sort of kick things off, and I have just a few slides, and I think Debbie's going to kind of monitor the chat. And I'll kind of keep an eye on it as well. So as people have questions, feel free to chime in. Getting to talk about something like this and really thinking about how do you build your research productivity. And I realize a lot of people bring are at different stages in this progression. So and I feel like I'm kind of in the middle of it right now. So realizing that kind of as I developed the presentation, that's kind of the lens that I'm looking through as far as being just in the middle of it, and to a degree still figuring some of this stuff out. So at least for today, we'll talk about how do you involve students? What are some strategies? What are methods to develop partnerships across departments and institutions? How can you integrate local clinics and clinicians and maybe even industry? And then finally, just really, how do you pay for all of this? How can you find resources to support these sort of partnerships? Like Debbie said, I'm at Creighton University. We're in Omaha, Nebraska. This is kind of one of our health science buildings. We've also expanded to the Phoenix area. So we have a, kind of a branch campus in Phoenix. When looking at how do we build sort of these partnerships, I sort of think of or look at, well, what are the components of my, of my academic position? And realizing there's a scholarship component, there's a teaching component, and a service component. And I've sort of purposefully made, the scholarship's probably one of the higher or parts of my position that takes up the most time, or that I dedicate the most time to, and then teaching, and then service. But I think the absolute key here in building these partnerships is really looking where can you identify overlap in these. And so that's what I've tried to consistently do is thinking, okay, if scholarship is one of my main priorities, and that does not mean that teaching isn't important, it doesn't mean that service isn't important, but as far as kind of how I try to prioritize things, because eventually there are some things that sometimes you do have to say no. That this is kind of how I try to prioritize things. But ideally, I really look for areas that can have substantial overlap and can contribute, to those other circles if I'm kind of focused on one. I think it's also helpful to realize and appreciate, the kind of the clinical lens that I look through. And a lot of my background is sports and orthopedics. And so a lot of these partnerships that I'll talk about tend to have that slant to them, but hopefully for the folks that maybe don't necessarily have interest in sports or orthopedics, you can see the idea of the structure that goes into this, and then can sub those sort of those things out. But again, I sort of look through that sports lens, if you will. And a lot of my sports affiliations are either at Creighton University or with USA Wrestling. This is one of our research labs at Creighton. And my primary research interest is to look at the neuromuscular consequences of joint injury. And so to be able to do that, we need to have established partnerships. Now, I was very fortunate early on in my career where Karen Pascal was kind of the first department chair that I had at Creighton, and then Debbie Givens was second department chair that I had at Creighton when I was really getting started. And I was very fortunate to have good mentors to help connect me with people within the community, and to really help serve as good role models. But I think one of the most fundamental aspects of this is you have to build that network. So no different than building kind of your research agenda and building out those components, that you have to actively build this network. And sometimes to be able to build that network, you have to make your way out of the office or out of the lab or out of the ivory tower, so to speak, and meet these groups where they are. And so that's one thing that I've tried to do, is building that network from students, whether other departments at university, other institutions or other entities, reaching out to clinicians, and then looking at resources. So really trying to build that network. As far as students, primarily at Creighton University, we are, we're the only top 20 U.S. News and World Report program that doesn't have an affiliated PhD program. So we are an entry-level program. We're actively looking at ways that we can add, a PhD program into, sort of our department, or collaboratively across departments at Creighton, but again, right now we don't have that. So we do have our entry-level physical therapy students. An aspect is when I started at Creighton, all of the students were required to do a research project, and that sort of went away initially, after the first year or two, and then it became more optional. And so that sort of made me think about things differently. But we do have our entry-level students. We have a robust undergraduate campus, and developed relationships with exercise science and pre-health professions primarily. Additionally, there are other health science programs at Creighton, and primarily in the area of medicine, that tend to gravitate towards some of the research that I do. So think physical medicine and rehabilitation in the med school having some overlap with physical therapy. And then additionally, going kind of externally and thinking of other graduate programs at other institutions. University of Nebraska at Omaha is one in the Omaha area that has a very good biomechanics program and kinesiology, both at the PhD level and at the master's degree level. And so that's another area where we've partnered. And then additionally with our physical therapy residents. So there's a lot of different student groups that we've been able to sort of partner with from a research perspective. But I think one of the big things is, you know, in thinking about students and, you know, well, how can students and primarily entry-level students help advance, you know, your research agenda? And that's where I've really tried to be very selective with students and very upfront that, you know, we'll do a lot of research that tends to focus on the areas that I have interest. And so it's not a lot of student initiated ideas, but maybe we try to break off pieces of things that we're already doing that can help contribute, you know, to my research agenda. And so some examples, and that I think are really easy sometimes for students, I think healthy populations and things like reliability studies and something where you can, you know, if they're actually collecting data, that those are probably the easiest to get done. And so we've had students that have you know, performed reliability studies on healthy individuals, and they end up getting those published, and they present those, you know, those studies. And so for little things like that, I think that works out well. The other area that we've looked at is existing data sets. And I'll talk about kind of our relationship with athletics and kind of an ongoing study that we have as far as measuring postoperative outcomes following lower extremity surgeries and injuries. And those are other areas where students have really helped, but we've tried to stay focused with very specific ideas. Some of the ways that we've integrated that, and where I talk about some of the overlap here, we've tried to make or allow students opportunities to receive course credit as well. And so, yeah, a student might start off with shadowing, but things like an independent study are a good way that can help reflect the teaching that we're doing. Things like journal club. We've converted our journal club course into you know, kind of a special topics in rehabilitation science. So now that is a 1-credit course that meets once a week. So it reflects back on some of the teaching, because there is valuable teaching that goes into it. But that's kind of another way that we've involved students. We've also added specialization tracks on whether sports and research, again, has a teaching component and then has as a research component, and then also serving on thesis or dissertation committees. The big thing with students and trying to tie things in and realizing, again, Creighton isn't specifically a research intensive institution, but I think we're a little bit on the bubble and striving to increase our capacity. But on my end, the students that come, you know, work with me in the lab, I want that to be a meaningful experience and fun. So yes, we you know, we do collect data. We try to get do presentations both at the local and national levels. And some of our students have, you know, received awards at, you know, our university research day or kind of regional meetings. Some of our students have presented at combined sections. And then we also try to have fun. And the fun aspect, I think we've tried to tie in things like other, you know, social events. So we'll have a Journal Club Olympics every year. Journal Club, we try to also meet at least once a semester, sort of in the evening, and you know, go to a restaurant or something like that, and sort of tie in some of those social aspects into the research component. Students are just starting out, and particularly in the entry-level program, so we realize it needs to be fun. Tried to have partnerships with other departments and institutions, and one of the best ways that I can say to help kickstart that is just be involved. And attendance and seminars, volunteer to do one of the talks or one of the guest lectures, and some guest lectures at, say, the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And so that gets their students maybe that are interested or that are in the entry-level athletic training program or the biomechanics program, 1, interested in physical therapy, and 2, maybe interested in research. It also serves as a pipeline to help be a thesis or dissertation committee member. We partnered with clinics, and, you know, a lot of the clinics in town will send us patients after lower extremity joint injury or surgery, and we'll do a lot of the postoperative testing. We send that report back. One of the student projects last summer was kind of a quality improvement project where she really tried to help provide the clinic some estimates of where's your typical patient population at 2 months following knee surgery, 4 months following knee surgery, 6 months following knee surgery. It was data that was already there. And she just helped summarize it and help present it back to the clinicians that were sending us folks in the research lab. And then also we extend those offers and opportunities to participate in Journal Club to the clinics in town or clinics really across the country. So we'll have people drop in and interact with our students. So that's been one great aspect of Zoom. Another component is just our relationship with Creighton University Athletics. And I maybe spend 4 or 5 hours a week providing clinical services in athletics, but that also provides the opportunity to have access to the athletic trainers, the orthopedic surgeons, strength and conditioning staff, and the student athletes. And so when it comes time to have people come back to the research lab for different studies and things like that, you bet they're more than willing to partner with us and send those folks back. So it's a little investment on my end as far as helping to provide clinical services, but I need a little bit of that anyway to help maintain my specialist certification. So it ends up working out. So it provides just as much of an opportunity for me to maintain clinical skills as well as a conduit for research. And then we've extended that out because of a lot of the partnerships with athletics and working with different groups in the community. We have great relationships with other institutions like the University of Nebraska at Omaha, like private practice physical therapy clinics, as well as larger health systems within Omaha. But a lot of those things took work and time and networking to develop. Last little bit as far as some of the resources. We're very fortunate at Creighton University to have both resources for research at the undergraduate level as well as the graduate level. So ours is called the Center for Undergraduate Research and Scholarship, or CURIS. University of Nebraska at Omaha, they call theirs FUSE. But there is mechanisms at both institutions to help support undergraduate research, as well as mechanisms to help support graduate research. We've also, we've had students apply for a NASA Nebraska Space Grant Fellowship Program. That's helped provide money for students. And then we're very fortunate as well to have the Nebraska Foundation for Physical Therapy that not only funds, studies, but also has money set aside in what's called a Scientific Dissemination Award to help pay or help offset costs for individuals to present at say like a national or international meeting. So some of our students that end up getting to do a presentation at combined sections, they'll apply essentially for sort of this travel grant to help offset some of those costs. So I think sometimes you just have to look for the money to help be able to support these sort of things. That's really it from my end. And I think a lot of the other aspects of this will just really come through the discussion. So I'd be happy to answer questions, or we can kind of let Sujay roll into his component as well.
Thank you very much, Terry, for that excellent talk. And I will start sharing my slides right now. I hope you can all see it in a second. Okay, I hope my slides are up there. First of all, I would like to thank Debbie and Mary for giving me the opportunity to present in this seminar this evening. Along the lines of what Terry just presented about building bridges and collaborations, I wanted to bring in a slightly similar perspective, but kind of working with industry here. Just to give you a background, I have a PhD in biomedical engineering and a qualification in physical therapy, which kind of puts me in a nice interface between industry and our profession. But anybody who's in this talk or listening to this talk, I don't want you to go away thinking, oh, you got to be an engineer to do this link. It necessarily doesn't have to be. In fact, in my experience so far, I've collaborated with a lot of clinical faculty in my department and my previous departments, where we had built very successful collaborations with industry. And I'll tell you shortly why and how I did that. So just to give a quick introduction to Atlanta, because Debbie mentioned about ELC, I hope you'll all be there. And if you're visiting, this is the Georgia State downtown campus. We're right in the downtown area of Atlanta. And we are the largest university in the state of Georgia. We have 54,000 students. The Department of Physical Therapy is the oldest in the state of Georgia. We are now 53 years old, and we have 44 students in every year that we take in. And similar to how Terry mentioned, we also have student requirements for research, but it's very much faculty driven. So the students collaborate with us and we work collaboratively with them. In a previous presentation that Debbie talked about, we talked about our systematic review and meta-analysis program. So some of the students do a systematic review and meta-analysis as part of the research requirement. And other students collaborate with faculty in doing hands-on research with collecting data with either healthy subjects or with patient populations. And we are currently, I believe, ranked according to US News and World ranking that just came out yesterday. Georgia State still is one of, I think, in the nation, #2 now for innovation and undergraduate teaching. So it's a very much teaching-driven university, but research is on the rise in our university as well. So that is why we see ourselves as an aspiring university to develop our research portfolio. So my collaboration in the industry started not because of my interest in technology, but more importantly, with a vision to develop something that we can, as physical therapists, collaborate and contribute to development of technologies in our profession. So to that extent, my lab is called the Movement Technologies Lab. And what we are really doing here is working in the interface of physical therapy and biomedical engineering. My Doctor of Physical Therapy students and DPD PhD students work with me in helping either evaluate some of these technologies or develop some of these technologies, and more importantly, make it meaningful in a clinical context, because some of these technologies can be fantastic, but at the end of the day, the question we always ask is, how applicable is this in a clinical setting? And most of my research to date has been driven in that direction. So we're really a collaborative team of interdisciplinary research, working with engineers, either on the industry side. We also have some local collaborators in Georgia Tech who also have a campus very close to us. And also we work with the clinicians in the clinics who may have been using this technology, and they have brought it to our notice saying, is this something we can study further and provide some feedback to the industry to make it more clinically applicable? So the question is, why collaborate with industry, or what's the opportunity there? And like I mentioned, most of the time you would find when a product, before it comes to the market, let's say they come to us as clinicians or researchers and say, how do you think this could be applicable in a clinical setting? What we often find, at least in my experience, is that the product has been highly engineered with a high quality of hardware and software, but oftentimes it does not meet with the clinical needs. And that is not a problem as such for the industry, because they are developing based on what information they have gathered, but they have very little exposure to patient populations in clinic. And this is where we kind of become the bridge between the clinic and the industry, so that through university, the research flows to us in some ways. And sometimes we also have engineers coming to us not really understanding the clinical problem. So, robotics is a great example of that. The robotics that's been developed sometimes is highly complex, and sometimes getting a patient in there, getting them to train gets even more complicated. So this is where we can come up with solutions that could make it much more accessible, much more easier for individuals to train using those technologies. And also, when you have a new technology that's just arrived in the market or is still under development, sometimes the scope of practice of us as physical therapists is not fully understood by engineers, and we don't fully understand what that technology can bring for us as a benefit. So again, our studies are aimed at understanding the scope and developing the scope as well. And finally, as I mentioned before, some of the design might be fantastic, but is that an efficient design for a clinical deployment is a question we often ask. As in, like, is it practical? Is it something that a patient will be able to take on board and interact? Will a therapist require some extra training or qualification, or something that they can use right away in the clinic? So those are the sort of questions we want to answer. And if this is something you have had very limited experience working with, That's the sort of questions that might lead to research in itself inherently, and then you can involve students to engage in that kind of research. So one of the things when I talk about industrial research is I would say mind the gap. I know this is a phrase you may have heard if you've ever traveled to London. When you travel in tube, you always hear this thing, mind the gap. And it's one of those warnings we have to have in mind when we talk to industry as well as try to partner with them. Because the expectation in the industry versus the clinic is a little different, and that's where the gap exists, and it's important to recognize that. So if you take, for example, the industry, for them, a product to go to the market, that time is finite. They want a very quick movement from development to the industry, to the market, and therefore their time is finite. And the specifications are very important. They're very clear on what is it that they want to develop and how they want it to be perceived by the user, if you like. And they often focus on unique selling point of USPs, as you may have heard before. And finally, the clinical impact, yes, of course, they're interested in that because obviously the more impact they make, the more users, right? So from an economic perspective, that's what they're kind of focused on. But then as a clinician, what we often look at is patient safety. How safe is it for a patient of ours to use this product, and what kind of outcomes could we expect by using this particular technology? And of course, clinical feasibility is another thing we are very much focused on. And the third thing is, I think, the most important thing, which is the cost of that technology. It's great to have these wonderful robots or even little sensors, but is that feasible for a clinician to purchase in a private practice clinic? Can we get reimbursed for that service? These are all very valid questions. So we really need to think through this before we say this is a product that's applicable for clinical use, if you like. And of course, we are also interested in the impact on practices and like, how is it going to change my practice? How is it going to impact my patients' outcomes and so on and so forth. So that's where we need to match and say, okay, the industry has got this wonderful product, but how do we make it meet what, as clinicians, we are looking for in that particular product? So just to give you a brief background, these are some of the companies that I've worked with or continue to work with. And some of the names like NewStep, you might be very familiar with them. They recently came out with a product called Transit in the market. But prior to that product coming out, I had several years of engagement with them. It first started with them giving the equipment to us for $1. Believe it or not, that's a contract that I signed with them. And it came to my lab. And then we started just with DPT students looking at different research questions, like how is the interaction between this new device and how is the feedback provided by the device actually changing muscle recruitment and so on and so forth. And that led on to a nice industrial project that we got funded through the state of Michigan. And that went for about 1.5 years. And then we were able to present those, my DPT students who worked at that time were able to present at meetings, but we also put out some publications on that. And more recently, I started partnering with another industrial partner in Canada called Mindtech. This also is a funded project to the DoD that we have currently, and I was a co-investigator on that project. I put those two names on top because I don't want you to think that I've got funding for all of these things. They all started at different levels. Some would just be giving me the equipment to start with, and we do a small research project, and we kind of grow from that to a much larger clinical trial. And so I'm going to give you some like scaffold on how do we start. If you're somebody who's a novice, all the way to somebody who's trying to write a grant, what's that continuum look like? So let's take, for example, what I call phase one. This is an industry or a partner who's liking to come in with some ideas, explore it with the university, and maybe take that product to the next level to the clinic. The first thing I would say is before we go any further, let's make sure that our research interests, whatever it may be within the academic setting or within the clinical setting, are aligned, and the target population that we want to be using this technology on is clearly identified. Because a lot of times when I speak to industry, they don't even know who it is going to be applied for, and they try to pitch for different things. So I would say let's start with a very clear focus. And there has to be a good team, a clinician, an academic, or an engineer should be involved. And sometimes if you do not have one of those members, this is where I would say, and like how Terry mentioned, we need to probably go out of our departments. If you're in a university that has an engineering department, it's great to develop those partnerships with them to come on board on these projects and to collaborate with them. That's a good starting point for collaboration. And even before we go any further with that, I oftentimes set out the outcomes and the deliverables very clearly, saying We can only achieve, for example, a preliminary study looking at feasibility or validity of the technology we're looking at. So those are very clearly defined. And academic freedom, as we all talk about, is extremely important to us for publication. So this is where I usually have a memorandum of understanding that clearly spells out what we intend to deliver, how much time would it take, what are the resources that are required. And importantly, the findings have to be published on a timely manner, both for the industrial partner, but for also our students who are partnering in the research, because we do have some research requirements where they have to present, like Terry had mentioned before. And in most universities, there is an Office of Commercialization of Technology, and they are very interested in intellectual property. So if you have such a unit within your university, consult with them from day one on how intellectual property could be managed within the university, because this is a big touchy point for a lot of universities. They will allow you to collaborate, and then one day you realize you've actually given a lot of intellectual property, and now it's kind of the horse is gone out of the barn, and there's no more way to shut the door type of thing. So even as you start the early part of the collaboration, these are the things you want to keep in mind in terms of how we can negotiate those collaborations. And finally, once you have all of this sorted out, that's when I would say, let's start a little pilot study with a small grant. So in the previous slide, when I talked about Permobile, or one of the names you saw there, it's a wheelchair company out of Sweden. They came with an idea of testing ultralight wheelchairs with individuals with stroke. So we went through these steps, identified a plan of work, and finally I was able to get a small level of funding. It just was about $10,000, but that paid for a GRA position within the department. Through that, it also gave some funds for me to present the work later on, publish them in journal papers and so on and so forth. So you can start anywhere from that point for a small study. And it's important we negotiate those resources. We can't just say, let's do a study and there's no cost involved. That's not a good starting point as far as I'm concerned. So always there has to be some give and take, and a proper framework needs to be established. The second phase is what I call, now that you have a initial relationship set up, maybe you've done a pilot study, and if you want to continue in the direction, or even if, let's say this is now a product that's ready to go to the market, and they want to engage a clinical partner, I would say at this point, it has to be based on at least a pilot study plan for a phase 2 trial to establish how effective this technology is in terms of an intervention or in studying a patient population. And for that extent, if you're looking for funding in NIH and NSF, they do have these SBIR, STTR type grants. And this is something I worked with the industry to actually develop those sort of grants. And so that way, the industry knows exactly what we're trying to achieve, what kind of funding we need to take this product into a clinic. And the funding actually helps them to develop those sort of capacity, if you like. And it also, it's very important at this point to engage a hospital or a clinic. So this is not something I can just do out of my lab. So here in Atlanta, we have some partnership with Brady Memorial Hospital and also other local hospitals that we have collaborations with. And we usually bring in those partners on board when we start to negotiate these plans, if you like. And then sometimes the industry, like I told you before, they may not know which population to work with, or they may have already got a population they're working with, like maybe stroke or spinal cord injury. And we have sometimes said, maybe how about applying this technology to a wider population and take it to the next level so that the efficacy can be studied in a different population. That could be another way to look at it. And finally, let's say we are now at a phase where this is maybe a technology that's already available in the market. So a good example of that is my work with Mindtech. So they have an FES device that they are actually now marketing as a fee for service type of product. So you don't have to purchase it, but they will give you for a number of sessions and they will charge you by the session. But its efficacy still is not very clear in individuals with spinal cord injury. So this is where the DoD grant came in, which funded a clinical full-scale clinical trial. And this is still ongoing. We're just in the final phase of wrapping that trial up. And the technology is almost ready for market. And again, grants, again, through NIH or NSF could fund these kind of large intervention studies, or DoD as the example that I mentioned. So wherever you may be in this continuum, one of the things I would like you to take away is negotiate a good sort of a working relationship and lay out your goals very clearly from day one, because industry sometimes can be a very moving field and they will start creeping in with different things. So it's very important to negotiate that. So that's something I would very much emphasize before I conclude this talk. So with that, I would just like to stop here for questions, and I'm sure me and Terry have shared our experiences here. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. I'd like to leave my email here if anybody would like to contact me on this talk as well. And this is just our Pettit Science Center building where most of our labs and classrooms are located in downtown Atlanta. Hope you would be able to come and visit us. Thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, those of you who have questions, you're welcome to either ask them, put your videos on and ask them orally. That's not a very big group, so you're very much welcome to actively participate. Or if you feel like you'd like to ask the question in the chat, I'll be continuing to monitor that. So, so go ahead if you have something you'd like to just go on, and you know, if it gets a little rowdy, we can start raising our hands. So
Sure, I have a question. This is Mike Ellis. I'm on faculty at Northwestern University in Chicago. And this question may be more geared towards Sujay. So we talk a lot about involving DPT students in the research process. How do you feel about, or I like to advocate for also involving the DPT students in the development process, going after a problem versus research going after a question. How do you sell that? How do I make that argument that it's important to DPT's training to be involved in the development process?
That's a great question, Mike, and thank you for that, and great to meet you again. One of the things I do often, any projects that I put forward to my students, is that I never tell them what exactly the project entails. I give them a kind of title or broad like overview of 30,000 feet kind of overview of I'm doing something, let's say, with virtual reality technology. And then I just stop there and I say to them, what it is that you think this technology is about. I ask usually to ask them to read up a couple of publications which are out there. And I also ask them the question, what is your motivation to wanting to work there? And through those questions, I often find what they want to get out of it and what they would like to achieve. And then I try to kind of bring them towards the project that I may have in mind. So in other words, I often feel that when, like you said, students bring ideas, they feel more invested and they get more encouraged to be part of it. Rather than me giving all the ideas and say, okay, your job is to collect data, I often find those sort of relationship does not come out to be more productive. So that's the approach I've always taken. I've given a topic and then I've made them work to come up with ideas and thoughts. But when it comes to even developing a research question, I would say to them, okay, so if you want to test that, what is your primary kind of independent variables? What are your dependent variables here? You got to identify and make them work through that process. That's how I've taken the approach on that.
Thank you.
I think having been at different institutions and seen this debated, I think it's a matter of degree. There are some institutions that are adamant, have been adamant in the past, that they should be student-driven research projects. So I have, especially years ago when I was on the job market kind of thing, there were some institutions like the student should create the question, whatever question the student wants to ask, the faculty member should be there at the student's discretion. So if the student, so there were questions like, what is the something about this SI joint? They were all fascinated by the SI joint and whether or not it was anteriorly rotated or posteriorly rotated. And so as a faculty recruit, I was expected to stop everything in my lab and to do a research project about anterior, posterior, anominate, rotations and stuff. So I think the points that Terry and Sujay would make is that is the extreme, that some people actually expect that you might do in a faculty, versus I think they still allow a certain amount of freedom, but they have an agenda in their lab. And I know, Terry, do you want to respond to something like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, I mean, you start to go down a really slippery slope. And I think, you know, as I've developed more experience, say, I am much more comfortable having that conversation up front that, look, that's just not something that I can help mentor you on. Now, I guess, and the other good part is now I think most students that come in, you know, to the lab that have those interests, they sort of already know what they're getting into, which is nice. Now, there are a few exceptions, and maybe some that, you know, student wants to look at something upper extremity wise. And, you know, I'm like, man, I don't know if that's a great topic, but let's get connected maybe with somebody else that can help mentor that. And I might be able to provide some oversight there, but, you know, I usually don't like going down those roads very much. It's like, let's keep this as focused on, you know, the specific research agenda that I have. And usually that works out best, but sometimes there are exceptions. Try to connect people, and it's happened a little bit more on sports medicine end of things for us. You know, that there really aren't a lot of other faculty at Creighton that have an interest in sports medicine. So we say, all right, let's get the necessary people to the table. I'll take more of a secondary role here, so you can still get this project done. But boy, you better be pretty motivated if we're going to make some of those concessions. So it takes a very motivated student, I think, to be able to do that. So most of the time I just say no.
And Terry, you had listed residents or residency people as one of your potential collaborators or people that are interested in doing research. Do you require any research of the residents?
So at Creighton University, the answer to that is yes. So really what we did from our entry-level program is we used to require, you know, our entry-level students to either do sort of discovery-based research, systematic review, or a case report. And then we sort of did away with that, you know, as I got started. And then we sort of shifted that to the residents, and which I think makes a, you know, a degree more sense in that regard. So it still provides that flexibility with our physical therapy residents. They could do, you know, clinical case report, very valuable. They could do a systematic review, very valuable, or some are very interested in laboratory based, kind of more discovery based research, or something along those lines. And it provides some latitude there. And we have, you know, and they're sort of expected to, and provided the tools to be able to really develop their own research team, if you will. And so there have been some students that have worked with me, but on students that we don't really have overlapping interests, it's like, okay, let's get you plugged in with a good clinical mentor, a good research mentor to help make your project happen. But we have physical therapy residencies in pediatrics and geriatrics and neurological and women's health and orthopedics. And so that's a very wide range. And I'm not mentoring all of those folks, but it's like, let's get you plugged in with the people that can help mentor that. But that's one area I think to think about, you know, for folks that have maybe residency programs, or could say, you know, are there ways that if I were just starting out that we could maybe make this sort of happen, you know, a nice collaborative project, if you will. So it's just one option.
Sure. Thank you. Okay.
Before we get to the next question, which is a really important one that Kimberly Top has posed, I want to just comment. I happen to be very fortunate to be at the Honors and Awards ceremony and heard Colleen Keegan's Macmillan address. I don't know if anybody, you know, you can raise your hand if you were able to be there, but her Macmillan address was about adopting innovation and technology, and she challenged us to do that. But her as part of that, it is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And that was one of her major points in the thing. So as you're approaching research and these questions that Terry and Sujay have said, both of them sort of mentioned, is what is the problem you're trying to solve, and how does technology, or how does the research and involvement of students and include that? So, look for that in the publicity from Colleen and her address, because it was pretty provocative, because that's really what's important. So both of you, this is a good question for both of you, and I know we all struggle with this. Dr. Top is asking about financial support and the finances of this, and making sure you're getting enough to cover the cost, the true cost of research, and that we do tend to undervalue our time and how much facilities, faculty, students, and all these things cost. So can you talk a little bit about negotiating that? And I'm not sure if it's all about for industry, or specific to industry, or just in general.
Hey, would you like to go first?
This is probably the area where I'm not very good, because like, to a certain degree, and I'll be brief on this, that really, unless it substantially overlaps, and we'll provide like I said, we'll do postoperative strength and biomechanical analyses, after people have had lower extremity surgery, or providing, kind of some preseason baseline, evaluation metrics for athletics. But a lot of it's done at no cost. And I know people's heads would explode on that. They're like, what? But we've tried to, if it helps our research agenda, then I'm okay with it. But now we're starting to get some requests that are a little beyond that. Well, can you do pitching biomechanics? Well, in theory we could, but again, back to research agenda. So I think those are things to negotiate out. But Sujay, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Terry. We are exactly in the same position too, because we, as I said, are primarily a teaching kind of a department, and most of our clinical faculty, especially when they want to get involved in research, it's oftentimes, like you said in your question, Dr. Top, they undervalue their time and also their effort. So one of the questions I often ask my faculty colleagues is that if you need to do this work, what is the support that you need, either from the institution or even from the partner? And oftentimes the answer is, it'll be great if I can get some time off from my teaching to do that work, or it could be, can I have some assistance to do like a GRA or a research fellow to help that sort of work to happen? And both of them come with a cost. And most of your departments will have a value associated with what it is to buy out a course, or what it is to get a GRA or a GTA position. So I use that as like a starting point to work out a brief budget as to what may be needed to do the project. But on the other side of the equation is a type of partner we are trying to collaborate with. Imagine if it's a small clinic and I go to them and say, I need $40,000 to do this work. There's no way I would get that fund, or for that matter, a startup company. So I then look at what is the capacity of that company or the partner who's coming to us asking for that research. And so we then try to this is where the negotiation comes in. We say, okay, if you're a clinic, could you, for example, give us a clinician whose time, maybe it could be 1 hour or 2 hours a week, to help recruit some of the subjects, so they can do some of the recruitment for us. We can then come in with my DPT student, collect data with you. That is a resource. That's a good support for us. Or if it's an industry, then like I said in the example before, could you, for example, fund a DPT student's time to use help with the data collection? And could there be some resources available for us for dissemination type of thing? Well, that sort of thing comes up to like a $10,000 fund. But if somebody says, no, we want to do a full-blown clinical trial, there's no way I can tell them I can do this trial for $10,000. That's when you really have to go to the NIH or to a federal funding agency to get a larger grant. So my answer to you, Dr. Top, would be, it really depends. And that, when I say it depends, my students don't like the answer too. And I hope, sometimes we, as PTs, talk about it depends. And this is one of the situations where we have to look at both sides of the equation. The partner we're trying to partner with, and also what is our commitment from ourselves. And I hope that helps answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I'm going to say this wrong. Gretchen Sele, I'm sorry, Gretchen. I know I should be able to say your name right, but she says, do you have any tips for new faculty to facilitate the development of research partnerships? How, for example, clinical partners for recruitment of participants or collaborators who have a particular expertise, or tips to help them get them up and running as quickly as possible?
Yeah, great question. And, I think, the advice that I'd offer, one starting small and making sure that project's feasible. But I talked about it a little bit where, meeting the clinic where they are. And I think that's where sometimes, just doing those things like an in-service or, at a local meeting or, state meeting, those sort of things are sometimes helpful to just expose new faculty to, the clinicians in the area. Having a good alumni network and knowing the clinicians in the area are helpful. That's where I'm, very fortunate, at Creighton University, and we have a great clinical education team that knows clinicians in town, and that can help say, oh, go talk to this person or go talk to this person. And what I found is if they like you, they're more willing to work with you. And then also sometimes those clinicians, they like to help write the manuscript or help do the presentation. And so they might be a good collaborator in that regard. Now, you can't put everybody on the manuscript, but sometimes you can be selective and help, to a degree, mentor some of those folks along, even if you're brand new. Another area where I tell people is if you're really trying to recruit clinical populations, really think about, well, if I can find people that have had this particular condition for a period of time, and we've used this, for people post-op meniscectomy or post-op ACL reconstruction with knee OA, and we'll say, can we do like a chart review, or can you send a mailing to everybody that's come into the clinic? We'll pay for it, but that everybody that's coming in over the past year or the past 2 years to help build that recruitment network. So that's one area where I found that that's really helpful versus saying we're going to try to recruit everyone that now comes into the clinic starting today with knee arthritis. That makes it tougher. So let's make the first project a little more retrospective, if you will. And I found that sometimes those things are easier, but the clinicians, you got to get along with them. They have to like you. Otherwise, you're just trying to build these sort of false, hollow relationships. And that's where I found it's helpful to do that.
Harry, that was a great answer. I don't think I can beat that. But just one addition, if I were to make, is in all of our departments, that is the director for clinical education. When I first started as a faculty, I made a good friend with the director for clinical education. And they oftentimes want to get clinical sites. And one way to get clinical sites is to go and give in-service presentations, I found out. So what I would say is I would volunteer myself, say, I can come and give a talk on some of my recent work that I've done with a DPT student group, for example. And then when I give the talk from the floor, I would get a couple of questions saying, can you do this with our clinical population? Or we have this new technique we're trying. How do we study that? So I've then partnered with them. Not only that, as Terry said, sometimes clinicians also very much would like to be part of that research. So I have given them that ownership by saying, well, you could actually be a co-author in the presentation or work with us. And I think those sort of relationship goes a long way. And once they realize that there is a, kind of give and take, but also there's some benefit, it actually opens a lot of doors. I've found that is in my little experience that I've had.
Very good. I think, the advantages of new faculty is that there tends to be a lot of low hanging fruit for finding pilot grant support, funding and things like that. I think the challenge is as faculty get beyond 5-6 years of away, that there are fewer and fewer grants. The other thing I'm learning as from hiring people from different places is they'll tell me, I just had a student get capstone funding from, I think, rheumatology, and so look, as those guys said, sometimes you can get your DPT students funded for capstone projects and things like that from your state chapters or different associations. So I don't think we oftentimes see that because they're doctoral students now that they have funding opportunities as well for some of these projects. So we're pretty much out of time. And so I want to thank our two speakers for opening up some ideas about how to think about, that they're not always a big NIH funded project, multi-center clinical trials. And I think that what you can also find is that on our RIPPT consortium pages, every time we've done a webinar, it's been recorded. So encourage your faculty to go through this wonderful library, and there's so many resources. I know Sujay's talk on systematic reviews and meta-analysis have many good role models, again, for increasing publications. And so we're really trying to help support the community of scholarship and physical therapy academics. And we have some good ideas for next year, but stay tuned and come to ELC if you can and join us there.
Yeah, and bring your ideas of what you would like to be presented next year.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you to all.
Yep, and this is it.
Thank you.
Thank you.